February 9, 1943. A 22-year-old Marine private with 17 bullets faces an entire Japanese company in the darkness of Guadalcanal's jungle. By dawn, 65 enemy soldiers lie dead across a quarter-mile radius. He survives by doing the one thing his training explicitly forbade: refusing to stay still. The explosion that killed the supply bunker happened at 2,117 hours, though Michael DeLuca wouldn't know the exact time until much later, when someone with a working watch told him. He only knew that one moment he was handing ammunition crates to Corporal Vickers through the reinforced doorway, and the next moment there was no doorway, no Vickers, no bunker, just a wall of heat and pressure that lifted him off his feet and threw him backward into the ferns. His ears screamed with a single sustained note that drowned out everything else. He lay on his back, staring up at the canopy, watching palm fronds shake against the stars. His chest hurt. Everything hurt. He tried to remember how to breathe and discovered he was already breathing, fast and shallow, like he'd just run the length of Atlantic Avenue with Johnny Marcello on his heels. That memory came to him complete and sharp. Johnny's face red with anger, the smell of fish guts from the docks, the way his knuckles had felt when they connected with Johnny's jaw. He was 14 then. His father had told him afterward, in the kitchen of their apartment above the butcher shop, that when you're surrounded, you keep moving. You never let them pin you down. DeLuca sat up. The screaming in his ears began to separate into distinct sounds. Small fires crackling, with settling, someone moaning somewhere in the dark. He reached for his rifle and found it still slung across his chest. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs until they steadied, the way his father had taught him, the way he'd done before every boxing match at the Catholic Youth Club on President Street. The supply bunker was gone. Where it had stood was now a crater smoking in the moonlight, edges glowing orange with scattered embers. DeLuca counted bodies in his head. Vickers, Patterson, the new kid from Oklahoma whose name he couldn't remember. All inside when the shell hit. Artillery, probably. Japanese 75 millimeters, judging by the size of the hole. Which meant they had the range. Which meant they'd be coming. He checked his ammunition. 2 clips in his belt, 1 in the rifle. 17 rounds total. No grenades, those had been in the bunker. His canteen was half full. He had his K-bar knife, his helmet, his boots. That was everything. The nearest Marine position was Checkpoint Baker, maybe 400 yards east through the jungle, but he didn't know if Baker still existed. The artillery barrage had been walking across their entire sector for the past 20 minutes before it found the bunker. The moaning stopped. DeLuca waited in the silence that followed, listening past the ringing in his ears. The jungle at night on Guadalcanal was never truly quiet. Insects, birds, the constant drip of moisture from the canopy, the rustle of things moving through undergrowth. But there was a quality to the silence now that made his scalp prickle. His father used to say you could feel a fight coming the same way you could feel rain, a pressure change in the air. DeLuca felt it now. He moved away from the crater, low and fast, angling into the thicker vegetation. Marine doctrine was clear. Hold your position, establish a defensive line, wait for support. But there was no position to hold anymore, no line, no support coming through an artillery barrage. The rulebook assumed you had something to work with. DeLuca had 17 bullets and the darkness. 50 yards from the crater, he went to ground behind a fallen mahogany trunk slick with rot. The smell was overwhelming. Decomposition, fungus, the sweet sick odor of the jungle eating itself. He controlled his breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, counting silently. For counts in, for counts out. His hands had stopped shaking. The first Japanese soldier appeared at the crater's edge at 2,134 hours, though DeLuca still had no watch and no way of knowing. The soldier was visible only as a silhouette against the embers, helmet distinctive, rifle held at port arms. Then another silhouette and another. They moved carefully, professionally, checking the perimeter. DeLuca counted 8 before he stopped counting. More were coming through the jungle behind them. He could hear them now. Equipment rattling, whispered commands in Japanese, the sound of many feet moving through undergrowth. They thought the bunker crew was dead. They were right about that. They thought the position was clear. They were wrong. DeLuca watched them spread out, establishing their own perimeter, claiming the ground. He could kill maybe 3 before they pinpointed his muzzle flash. Then they'd flank him, surround him, finish him. Unless he moved, unless he kept moving. He sighted on the nearest soldier, a man crouched beside the crater examining something on the ground. Center mass, squeeze not pull, the rifle but firm against his shoulder the way Sergeant Morrison had drilled into them at Camp Lejeune. He fired once. The soldier dropped. Before the others could react, DeLuca was already moving, scrambling along the backside of the fallen trunk, putting 20 feet between himself and his firing position. He went flat in the ferns as rifle fire erupted behind him, rounds snapping through the air where he'd been, tearing into the rotten wood, too high and too late. Voices shouting now in Japanese. Muzzle flashes in the darkness, firing at shadows. DeLuca waited, counting seconds, letting them waste ammunition on nothing. When the firing stopped, he heard them moving, trying to flank his last position. He was already somewhere else. The jungle fought him. Every movement produced sound. Leaves rustling, branches breaking, his boots sucking in mud. But it fought them too, and there were more of them, and they were angry now, coordinated. He could hear an officer directing them, voice sharp with command. They were good. They knew what they were doing. They were spreading out in a tactical formation, moving to encircle. DeLuca thought about Brooklyn, about the Navy Yard where his father worked, about the time 3 kids from the Italian neighborhood cornered him in an alley off Columbia Street. He'd been 12. They'd wanted his shoes. His father found him an hour later, nose bleeding, shoes still on his feet. 3 kids scattered. His father hadn't asked what happened. He just said, "You kept moving. That's good." He found another position behind a cluster of palms, maybe 70 yards from his first shot. The Japanese were still clustered around the crater, confused, their perimeter collapsing inward. He could see 8, 10, maybe 12 soldiers in the firelight. He picked a target on the far edge, fired, moved immediately. This time he went 40 yards at an angle, toward where he guessed their command element might be. Another burst of return fire behind him, shredding vegetation. Again too late. 16 rounds left. The pattern repeated. Fire, move, wait. Fire, move, wait. Each time from a different angle, a different range. Sometimes he fired twice before moving. Sometimes he moved without firing at all, just to reposition, to keep them guessing. The Japanese were disciplined. They didn't panic, didn't cluster together, didn't waste ammunition blindly. But they were reacting to a threat they couldn't locate, couldn't predict. He could hear the frustration in their voices, the confusion. The jungle was a maze of shadows and moonlight, of dense undergrowth and sudden clearings. DeLuca used everything. Fallen logs, thick ferns, the deep black shadows under the canopy. He moved in a wide circle, sometimes toward them, sometimes away, never establishing a pattern. His father's voice in his head. They expect you to run. That's what prey does. Don't be prey. 14 rounds left. A soldier appeared directly in front of him, materializing out of the darkness like a ghost. So close DeLuca could smell his sweat. Neither of them had expected it. Collision in the dark, the chaos of soldiers hunting a ghost. The Japanese soldier's eyes went wide. DeLuca's K-bar was in his hand before his brain registered the decision. The blade going up under the man's ribs, finding the heart. The soldier made a sound like air escaping a tire and collapsed. DeLuca eased him to the ground, took his grenades, 3 Type 97s, and kept moving. He didn't take the man's rifle. He didn't have time. He could hear more soldiers converging on the sound of the body falling. The grenades changed everything. He worked his way to high ground, a slight rise where erosion had exposed coral beneath the topsoil. From there he could see them. At least 20 soldiers now, maybe more, sweeping through the jungle in a ragged line. They'd given up trying to pin him down and switched tactics, trying to flush him with a broad push. It was the right move, probably. But they were bunched too close together, visible in patches of moonlight. DeLuca pulled the pin on the first grenade, counted, threw hard toward the center of their line. He was moving before it detonated. The explosion lighting up the canopy, screams following. He threw the second grenade at where he guessed they'd take cover, waited for the blast, threw the third at a different angle. Then he was running, really running now, because they knew where he was approximately and they were coming. Rifle fire chased him through the jungle, rounds cracking past his head, impacting trees. Something burned across his left shoulder. A graze he didn't stop to check. His lungs burned. His legs burned. He dodged through the undergrowth like he was dodging through Brooklyn traffic, like he was running from Johnny Marcello and his cousins, like everything depended on not stopping, because it did. He found a stream bed, almost dry this time of year, and followed it downhill, boots splashing in the trickle of water, using the depression for cover. Behind him the sounds of pursuit were more scattered now, less coordinated. He'd hurt them. He didn't know how badly. Didn't matter. They were still coming. 11 rounds left. The streambed led to a small ravine where fallen trees created a natural barrier. DeLuca went to ground there, wedging himself into the space beneath a massive trunk, controlling his breathing, forcing his heart to slow. The darkness here was nearly absolute. He could hear them spread out across the jungle above him, calling to each other, trying to reform their line. He waited. Patience was survival. Panic was death. Time lost meaning. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into hours. His shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed it. Not deep, but bleeding. He pressed his hand against it until the bleeding slowed. His mouth was dry. He wanted to drink from his canteen but didn't dare make the noise. Sweat ran into his eyes. The jungle smelled like rot and cordite and blood. They came down into the ravine in pairs, moving carefully, knowing it was a good ambush site. DeLuca let the first pair pass, invisible in his hiding spot. The second pair paused directly above him, so close he could have reached up and grabbed their ankles. They were arguing in Japanese, one of them wanting to go back, the other insisting they continue. The argument saved their lives. They moved on before DeLuca had to make a decision. When they were gone, he extracted himself from beneath the log and moved again, this time following the ravine laterally, away from the direction they'd gone. He climbed out on the far side and found himself in a section of jungle he didn't recognize. Everything looked the same at night. Trees, ferns, shadows. He had no compass. The stars were intermittently visible through the canopy, but he'd never been good at navigation by stars. Sergeant Morrison had tried to teach him. It hadn't stuck. East was where the Marines were, probably. East was where he needed to go. He picked a direction that felt right and moved, keeping low, stopping frequently to listen. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but that didn't mean they'd given up. It meant they were being quiet too. He almost walked into their new position. Only instinct stopped him. Some change in the quality of darkness ahead, some sense that the shadows were wrong. He dropped flat in the ferns and watched. They'd established a perimeter in a small clearing, maybe 15 soldiers, dug in and waiting. For him. They thought he'd come this way. They were right. 9 rounds left. DeLuca worked his way around the clearing, wide circle, taking his time. His shoulder ached. His legs ached. Every muscle ached. He wanted to stop, to rest, to sleep. He wanted water. He wanted to be anywhere but here. He kept moving. On the far side of the clearing, he found what he was looking for. Their officer, positioned slightly back from the line, directing his men with hand signals. Take out the officer, create chaos, maybe they'd break. Or maybe they'd just hunt him harder. Only one way to find out. He sighted carefully, accounting for distance and the slight downward angle. The officer was maybe 70 yards out, partially obscured by undergrowth. Not an easy shot. Not impossible either. He controlled his breathing, squeezed the trigger. The officer dropped. For a moment nothing happened, the soldiers around him frozen in confusion. Then they were moving, converging on their fallen leader, perimeter collapsing. DeLuca fired twice more into the confusion, then was up and running before they could respond. Behind him, chaos erupted. Shouting, scattered gunfire. The sounds of an organized unit coming apart. 6 rounds left. He ran until he couldn't run anymore, then walked, then stumbled, then walked again. The night was endless. The jungle was endless. His body moved on autopilot, feet finding ground, eyes tracking shadows. His mind drifted. He thought about his mother's kitchen, about the smell of bread baking. He thought about Marie Costello, who'd kissed him at the Christmas dance before he shipped out, who'd promised to write. He'd received 2 letters from her at Camp Lejeune. Then nothing. He wondered if she'd found someone else. He wondered if he'd live long enough to care. Something moved in the darkness ahead. DeLuca froze, rifle coming up. A figure emerged from the undergrowth. Japanese soldier, alone, rifle slung over his shoulder, moving slowly. Wounded, maybe, or separated from his unit. He hadn't seen DeLuca yet. DeLuca could have let him pass. Could have stayed hidden, conserved ammunition. The soldier wasn't a threat, not really, not alone and moving away. But DeLuca thought about Vickers, about Patterson, about the kid from Oklahoma. He thought about the bunker exploding, about being thrown through the air, about waking up alone. He shot the soldier once, center mass. The man dropped without a sound. 5 rounds left. Dawn came slowly, the darkness lifting in gradations, black to gray to pale blue filtered through the canopy. With light came clarity and terror in equal measure. DeLuca could see where he was now. Deep in the jungle, nowhere he recognized. He could also see what he'd been moving through. Blood trails, scattered equipment, bodies. Some were Japanese soldiers he'd killed. Some were soldiers he hadn't killed. Casualties from the artillery barrage or from other fighting he hadn't seen. The jungle was a battlefield, had been a battlefield, would always be a battlefield. He found a depression beneath a cluster of ferns and went to ground, exhaustion finally overtaking adrenaline. His hands were shaking again. His entire body was shaking. He drank from his canteen, 3 long swallows, then forced himself to stop. The water tasted like rust and rubber. It was the best thing he'd ever tasted. Sleep pulled at him, but he fought it. Sleep was death. He needed to stay alert, stay ready. But his eyes kept closing, his head kept dropping. Just for a moment, he thought. Just rest for a moment. He woke to voices. Japanese voices, close. His rifle was in his hands before his eyes fully opened. His body moving on instinct. 3 soldiers were moving through the jungle maybe 30 yards away, searching methodically, checking behind trees, probing the undergrowth with their bayonets. They were looking for him or for someone like him, for any American who'd survived. DeLuca watched them through the ferns, barely breathing. They were moving toward his position. In maybe 2 minutes they'd be close enough to spot him. He had 5 rounds left. He could kill maybe 2 before the 3rd got him. Or he could move, try to slip away, hope they didn't see him. But he was exhausted, his body slow, his movements loud. They'd hear him. He made his decision. Waited until they were 20 yards away. Then rose to a knee, fired 3 times, fast, transitioning between targets. 2 soldiers dropped. The 3rd dove behind a tree returned fire. DeLuca was already moving, angling away from the direction they'd come, betting that more soldiers were that way, that flanking away from their reinforcements was the smarter move. 2 rounds left. He moved for another hour, directionless now, just putting distance between himself and the last contact. The sun climbed higher. The jungle steamed. His uniform was soaked through with sweat and mud and blood. His and others. His shoulder had stopped bleeding but throbbed with every heartbeat. He was so thirsty his tongue felt like leather. He finished his canteen. The water was gone. Everything was gone. He found a game trail and followed it, gambling that game trails led to water, that water meant streams, that streams might lead him somewhere useful. The trail wound through the jungle, narrow and overgrown, barely visible. He moved slowly now, every step an effort, his body announcing its intention to shut down. Not yet, he told it. Not yet. The trail led to a stream as he'd hoped, but the stream was already occupied. For Japanese soldiers were refilling their canteens, talking quietly, rifles propped against a tree. They hadn't seen him. They were 50 yards away, relaxed, thinking they were safe. DeLuca leaned against a tree and closed his eyes. He was done. Finished. He had 2 bullets and 4 targets and no energy left to run even if he managed to kill them all. This was where it ended. His father's voice. You're not dead until you're dead. DeLuca opened his eyes, studied the situation. The soldiers were clustered together, a tactical mistake but understandable. They'd been fighting all night too, they were tired too. Their rifles were propped against a tree, 3 feet away from them. 3 feet might as well be 3 miles in a firefight. He sighted on the nearest soldier, the one closest to the rifles. Fired. The soldier dropped. The others lunged for their weapons. DeLuca fired his last round, hit another soldier, then was running toward them, not away, his K-bar in his hand, because running away meant they'd get their rifles and kill him, and running toward them meant maybe, just maybe, he'd get there first. He got there first. The third soldier was bringing his rifle up when DeLuca slammed into him, driving the knife into his throat, riding him to the ground. The fourth soldier clubbed him with a rifle stock, catching him across the back. DeLuca rolled, came up with the dead soldier's rifle in his hands, fired from the hip at point-blank range. The soldier went down. DeLuca stayed on the ground, gasping, the rifle loose in his hands. For more bodies. He'd stopped counting earlier, but now he started again, working backward through the night. The soldiers at the crater. The grenades. The officer. The scattered contacts. The numbers didn't make sense. They were too high. No one killed that many soldiers in one night. Not alone. Not with 17 bullets and 3 grenades. Not by running away. Except he hadn't run away. He'd run toward and away and sideways and in circles. He'd never stopped moving. Movement was survival. His father had been right. He forced himself upright, picked up one of the Japanese rifles, checked it. Type 38, 5 rounds in the magazine. He took ammunition from the dead soldiers, took their canteens, drank until his stomach hurt. The water was warm and tasted like metal, but it was water. He refilled his own canteen from the stream, drank again. His body began to remember it was alive. The sun was high now, filtering through the canopy in dusty shafts. Morning, maybe mid-morning. He'd been fighting for something like 6 hours, though it felt like 6 years. He needed to find the Marine lines. Needed to report. Needed to warn them that Japanese forces were operating in this sector in strength. That the bunker was gone. That he was the only one left. He oriented himself by the sun, picked east, started walking. The Japanese rifle felt wrong in his hands. Lighter than the M1, different balance, bolt action instead of semi-automatic. But it was loaded and he wasn't, so he carried it. The jungle was quieter now, or maybe he was just too tired to hear it properly. He moved mechanically, one foot in front of the other, checking his surroundings out of habit rather than conscious thought. His body was operating on something beyond exhaustion, some reserve he didn't know he had. He'd heard about this from the older Marines, the ones who'd seen action in the Philippines or China, the point where your body gives up but keeps moving anyway, the point where you stop feeling fear because you're too tired to feel anything. He found the first American position at 1,430 hours. He knew the time because the Marines there had watches, had radios, had everything he'd been missing. They almost shot him. He looked like hell, covered in mud and blood, carrying a Japanese rifle, emerging from the jungle like a ghost. He identified himself, gave his unit, and watched them relax slightly while still keeping their rifles ready. Supply bunker got hit last night, he told the lieutenant who came forward. Everyone else is dead. Japanese forces are operating west of here, company strength at least, maybe more. I've been in contact continuously since 2,100 hours. The lieutenant studied him. Continuously. Yes, sir. You've been fighting alone since 2,100 hours. He checked his watch. Nearly 17 hours. Yes, sir. How many enemy did you engage? DeLuca opened his mouth, closed it. The number in his head seemed impossible. I don't know, sir. More than I could count. Estimate, Marine. 40, sir. Maybe more. The lieutenant looked at him like he was crazy, or lying, or both. You expect me to believe you killed 40 enemy soldiers by yourself in one night? I didn't say killed, sir. I said engaged. I don't know how many I killed. But you survived. Yes, sir. The lieutenant sent out patrols. They came back 3 hours later with numbers. 65 confirmed Japanese Kia scattered across a quarter-mile radius. And those were just the ones they could find. More blood trails leading deeper into the jungle suggested additional casualties that had been evacuated. The patrol leader reported that the kill pattern was consistent with a highly mobile defender who'd refused to be pinned down, who'd used terrain and darkness to maximum advantage, who'd fought more like a guerrilla than a conventional infantryman. The lieutenant looked at DeLuca with new eyes. "You invented that tactic on the spot?" "No, sir. I just kept moving. Staying still gets you killed." "That contradicts Doctrine." "Yes, sir. Doctrine says hold your position." "I didn't have a position to hold, sir." The lieutenant was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's your name again?" "DeLuca, sir. Private First Class Michael DeLuca." "Where you from, DeLuca?" "Brooklyn, sir." "They teach you to fight like that in Brooklyn?" DeLuca thought about his father, about Johnny Marcello, about the alley off Columbia Street. "Yes, sir. They did." The story spread. Not officially, the after-action reports were dry, clinical, noted effective mobile defense by PFC DeLuca resulting in significant enemy casualties without elaborating. But the Marines talked. Word passed through the ranks. The kid from Brooklyn who fought alone all night, who broke every rule and survived, who killed 65 Japanese soldiers by refusing to stay still. Other Marines started moving more in combat, started questioning the doctrine of static defense in jungle warfare. Officers noticed casualty rates dropping in sectors where their men adopted more mobile tactics. No one called it the DeLuca method, no one wrote it into the manual, but it spread anyway, the way knowledge spreads among people who need it to survive. DeLuca received a Bronze Star. The ceremony was brief, held at a forward position 3 days after the fight. The citation mentioned exceptional courage and tactical innovation under enemy fire. It didn't mention the 65 confirmed kills. It didn't mention the night of constant movement, of fighting panic, of surviving by doing everything his training had told him not to do. Citations never mentioned those things. He rotated stateside in October 1943. The ship took 3 weeks to reach San Diego, and DeLuca spent most of that time on deck, watching the ocean, not talking to anyone. His shoulder had healed, leaving a pale scar. The other scars weren't visible. Back in Brooklyn, he moved into his parents' apartment above the butcher shop. His father had aged 10 years in the 18 months DeLuca had been gone. His mother cried when she saw him, then cried again when he couldn't explain why he couldn't sleep, why sudden noises made him drop to the floor, why he couldn't be in crowded rooms without mapping all the exits. He got a job at the Navy Yard, same as his father. He married Marie Costello in 1946. She'd been waiting after all. Her letters lost somewhere in the Pacific. They had 3 children. He never told them about Guadalcanal, about the night he'd spent moving through the jungle, about the number of men he'd killed. When they asked about the war, he said it was over and changed the subject. He attended Marine Corps reunions occasionally but always left early. He didn't talk about his Bronze Star. He didn't talk about doctrine or mobile defense or anything tactical. If someone brought it up, if someone said they'd heard the stories, he'd shake his head and say it was a long time ago. Which was true. Which didn't make it feel any less immediate. The nightmares lasted decades. Always the same. The jungle at night, the sounds of pursuit, the sensation of being surrounded, of running out of ammunition, of running out of time. He'd wake up gasping, his wife's hand on his shoulder, her voice pulling him back to Brooklyn, to their bedroom, to safety. "It's over," she'd say. "You're home." It never felt entirely true. He worked at the Navy Yard for 37 years, retired in 1980, died in 1992 of a heart attack while watching television. He was 71. His obituary in the local paper mentioned his military service in a single line. Michael DeLuca, 71, a World War II veteran, died Monday at his home in Brooklyn. The historian found him by accident. Dr. Sarah Chun was researching the evolution of infantry tactics in the Pacific Theater, specifically the shift from static to mobile defense that occurred in late 1943. The official doctrine hadn't changed until 1944, but casualty statistics showed a clear inflection point in early 1943, particularly in the Guadalcanal campaign. She followed the statistics to after-action reports, from reports to citations, from citations to a Bronze Star awarded to PFC Michael DeLuca for actions on February 9, 1943. The citation was vague, but patrol reports from the following days were not. 65 confirmed enemy Kia, single defender, mobile tactics. Chun interviewed surviving members of DeLuca's unit, tracked down patrol leaders, compiled timelines. The picture that emerged was extraordinary. A lone Marine, surrounded, who'd survived by abandoning Doctrine and inventing a new way to fight. She published her findings in the Journal of Military History in 1995, 3 years after DeLuca's death. The article was titled Innovation from Below: The Origins of Mobile Infantry Defense in the Pacific Theater. It was dry, academic, thoroughly researched. It mentioned DeLuca by name. It acknowledged that what he'd done had saved not just his own life but potentially hundreds of other Marines' lives as his tactics spread informally through the ranks. A few military historians read it. A few professors assigned it to graduate students. It didn't change Doctrine. Doctrine had already evolved past DeLuca's improvised methods, had formalized and refined them, had turned survival instinct into official tactics. But it put a name to the beginning. A single Marine in a single night who'd figured out that stillness was death and movement was life. No one ever asked DeLuca about it. By the time the article was published, he'd been dead for 3 years. His children learned about their father's actions from a military historian they'd never met, reading about a night he'd never described to them. They were proud, confused, grieving all over again. Why hadn't he told them? Why had he kept it secret? But he hadn't kept it secret. He just never thought it was worth mentioning. To him, that night on Guadalcanal wasn't heroism. It was terror, improvisation, the desperate actions of a trapped animal fighting for survival. He'd broken the rules because the rules didn't work, because staying still would have killed him, because his father had taught him that when you're surrounded, you keep moving. He'd been 22 years old. He'd been alone in the jungle with 17 bullets and no support. He'd survived not because he was brave, but because he was too afraid to stop moving. And 65 men died because he refused to stay still. And hundreds of Marines lived because he'd shown them a different way. And nobody knew, not really, not until decades later, not until a historian compiled the numbers and connected the dots and wrote an article that almost nobody read. History is full of moments like this, turning points that happened quietly, changes that spread without announcement, people who altered the course of events and never received recognition because they didn't think what they'd done was special. DeLuca went back to Brooklyn, worked at the Navy Yard, raised his family, died watching television. The Marine Corps moved on. The war ended. Life continued. But on February 9, 1943, in the jungle on Guadalcanal, a 22-year-old private from Brooklyn fought alone for 17 hours and survived by doing the one thing his training told him never to do. And that decision, that improvisation, that refusal to accept that stillness meant safety, it changed how Marines fought. Not immediately, not officially, but it changed them. The people who needed to know knew. The knowledge spread the way it always spreads among people whose survival depends on getting things right. Quietly, person to person, the whispered advice between veterans and rookies. Keep moving. Don't let them pin you down. Stillness is death. Michael DeLuca never knew his legacy. He never knew that tactics he'd invented in desperation would become doctrine. He never knew that historians would study his actions, that his name would appear in journals, that graduate students would write papers about the night he spent alone in the jungle. He only knew that he'd been afraid, that he'd kept moving, and that somehow he'd survived. That was enough. If the story moved you, if it made you think about the quiet heroes who change history without seeking recognition, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Leave a like if you learned something today, and drop a comment answering this question. What's a moment in history that changed everything but nobody noticed at the time? I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. This was the story of Michael Mick DeLuca, a Marine from Brooklyn who survived by breaking the rules. His fight lasted one night. His impact lasted decades. And his story, like too many others, was almost forgotten entirely. Don't let that happen. Remember his name. Remember what he did. And remember that sometimes the most important moments in history happen in the dark, witnessed by no one, changing everything.